Welcome to the How to Be an Expat podcast. My name is Kelly Boyle. I'm a career and expat coach. And today I have with me Janet Leffley. Janet moved from the US to Amsterdam 6 years ago, and she's an author and illustrator of children's books and middle grade novels. And Janet, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to you too. I know that we already talk about a lot of our expat experiences because I've been living. You've been in Amsterdam for 6 years. I've been in Lisbon for 6 years, and that's a lot of time to have these experiences and to experience a lot of like the entire breadth of expat life. So
Yeah.
my first question for you is why did you move to Amsterdam in the first place?
Well, it's kind of I'm not actually 100% sure. So I'm here with my husband Dan, and years ago I was an exchange student in the Netherlands, strangely enough.
I don't
In
think
a
I knew that.
Yeah, no, I was an exchange student in the Netherlands for in a little tiny town in the south, um, a little town called Nieuwendijk, just for the summer, for 3 months in the summer. And I really loved it. It was a great experience. I'm actually still friends with my host mom who lives in The Hague now.
Oh,
And yeah,
that's
so
cool.
so I knew when Dan and I would travel together, I knew I wanted to at some point visit the Netherlands with him and show him, I lived here for 3 months when I was a teenager. And so we came to Amsterdam, I think it was maybe 14 years ago, and we fell in love. Amsterdam is very different from the rest of the Netherlands, actually. I mean, it's Dutch, but it's also quite different from the other cities in the Netherlands. And so when we came, for me, it was sort of like, oh, I didn't know this city existed. I was staying in a little tiny town when I was an exchange student, so I didn't really experience Amsterdam. And it was really great. Both Dan and I are big bikers, so like bicyclists, and this is like the capital of biking in it was amazing, actually. You can just bike paths everywhere. Everyone's on a bicycle. Everybody's carrying the craziest things on their bicycle. Like we sat at like a cafe and watched people bike by, and then we'd be like, "Oh my God, look at that person! They have an outboard motor over their handlebars. Oh my God!" It was like crazy stuff. But we were really charmed by it. And actually, when we left, Dan said when the plane was taking off, he almost had tears in his eyes. He was so sad to be leaving because we really both felt so at home here.
Mhm.
And so years later, fast forward, um, Dan had left a job and he was getting on the verge of looking for a new job and thinking are we were maybe going to move to Austin. And he said one day, "What do you think about if I look in Amsterdam for a job?" And I said, "Go for it." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's never going to happen because it just seemed pie in the sky somehow.
Mhm.
But Amsterdam is the tech capital of Europe, and I don't think either of us realized that at the
Mm,
time because we're just, when you live in America, you're very America centric. And
totally.
so we just didn't actually, it just seemed like another continent. Like, how do you get to work in another continent? But because my husband's a software engineer and super good at it, we had a he had a job offer pretty much right away. He had a job offer, and 2 months. In 2 months from when he took that job, we had moved to the Netherlands. Like
Wow.
packed up everything in our house. We had a 3,200 square foot house in America.
Hmm.
We now live in a 57 square meter apartment, which maybe doesn't mean anything to someone who's not American, who's like not a European, but like the difference is dramatic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a big move. We came over with our
Yeah.
dog, Murphy, and just sort of like dove headfirst into expat life. So
Wow.
The
Two
company you got
months.
hired for was a Dutch company. They said
Hmm.
it'll take 2 months to get your visa, and you can start the day you get your visa.
Okay, okay. That was going to be my next question because my personal experience was that I was looking for a job in Lisbon before I knew I was going to be moving. So similar to
Mhm.
you, like my partner at the time and I had decided we're going to move to Lisbon. And then I was
Mhm.
like, okay, well, I need a visa, so I need a job.
Right.
And yeah, so when I found the job, then it took like paperwork and time and having to get appointment at the embassy. And so for
Oh,
me, from the time I got my job offer to the time I got my visa, I think it was like 4 months, maybe.
it's
So
okay.
actually, that's not that bad.
It's not that bad, but like to be fair, the Netherlands is very efficient. And so basically it was super easy. It was super easy to get our visas, to get everything settled. When we got here, it was like bang, 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 real quick. You go to the immigration office. It was very simple. I don't even have a strong memory of it. It was so simple.
That's
Get
amazing.
our cards, our resident cards. So, yeah, so we had a what's called a highly skilled migrant worker visa. And on that visa, I, as the wife of Dan, could work. So
Mhm.
that was a plus because that meant that I could also get a job or work, even though I'm freelance. I did do a whole bunch of freelance stuff. I was a tour guide in Amsterdam. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, I could still be, but right now I'm just taking a break because there's too much going on. But I did tours in Amsterdam. I trained people's dogs because I'm a professional dog trainer. You have to
Mhm.
be if you're an artist, you have to be a jack of all trades, or a Jill in my case, of all trades. So
You're a Janet of all trades.
I'm a Janet of all trades. Yes, that's even better.
I love that about you. That's something I find so interesting is that you've worn all these different hats. And to have to do that in a completely different country as well, that
Yeah, that
shows
was
like that's different, right?
really
How
different.
how did you find navigating that differently from in the US?
Well, it was interesting. I said it's again the Netherlands has this mission to be like welcoming entrepreneurs from all over Europe. Like that's one of their big goals. So you get like big tax breaks if you are working here in the Netherlands as a company and as an employee of those companies and so on and so forth. As a foreigner working here, you get what's called the 30% rule, which I don't know if you've heard or anyone's told you about it, but basically for at least at this point in time, according to the law in the Netherlands, for 5 years, you don't get taxed on your income from, oh God, I can't remember the percentage, but like you don't have to pay tax on I can't remember exactly what it is. I'll have
Like
to
the
ask Dan.
first, like the first 20% or the first 30% or
20%,
something
right.
like
There's
this,
something
or
like that. Yeah. It's
okay,
like
yeah.
20% or 25%. I can't remember, but it's only good for 5 years.
Hmm.
It's significant.
Yeah.
And they do that on purpose. So basically, when I went to sign up to become a freelancer, because they call it ZZP'er, it's a Dutch word. It's long.
Hmm.
Forget it. It just means freelancer.
Uh-huh.
It just means a self-employed person. It takes forever to say.
Uh-huh.
Um, But I just went into their office and I signed up. I signed up mostly online, and then I have to go in and have an interview with them. And it was easy peasy, and they were very supportive, and it was great. And of course, they're happy for you to do it because then you have to pay more taxes.
Yeah.
So, so it's not like it's a bad thing for them, but
Yeah.
it was super easy to do that. And so then I was able to do work where I also worked as an English teacher online, teaching Chinese children to speak English.
Uh-huh.
That kind of thing. I did all of these different kinds of jobs that I was able to do because I had the freelance, you know, business stuff
Got it.
taken care of. So,
Okay.
but like one of the things that's really interesting, little tiny things like the cultures of the different European countries still are distinct, even though it's European Union, they still have very distinct differences. And from America as well. And so one thing I did notice right away was that when I started giving tours, I started with one of those free tours, the kind that you give a tip at the end, and that's
Yep.
like your payment.
Yep.
Um, and it was really not profitable because most of the people who were on the tours were Europeans, and Europeans don't tip. So basically, I would sometimes give these 2.5 hour tours, and I would get like 10 euros.
Yeah, it's like nothing.
Nothing. And
It's like
so I,
way less than minimum wage
right,
in Europe.
like it's not worth doing it. But
No.
it's partly because culturally they just didn't understand the concept of tipping. They were like, no, but I mean, aren't you being paid by someone to do this? And the answer is no, you're supposed to be paying me later if you think I did a good job. But like they don't understand that concept. So I moved to a different platform, which was mostly Americans, and then I got actually tips
Yeah, that
that
makes
were like,
sense.
real tips that made it worthwhile doing the tours. But
Yes.
that was an interesting learning experience
Yeah,
because
that's interesting because yeah, in the US, for people that don't know, it's all tipping. It's all tips.
yeah, what is
Like
it?
you
20% now you tip?
I think that's what it was when I was living there.
Yeah,
It's
I think
like
it
20% on top of the bill,
the
you
bill.
know? So
Right.
it's like you go to a restaurant in the US, especially in New York City, right? Like when I lived in New York, I was a student for a lot
Yeah.
of it. I wasn't making a lot of money. I had not a lot of money. So you'd look at a restaurant menu, and you go, okay, and you'd have to do math, like deciding whether
Right.
to go to a restaurant. It's like, okay, if I order this, it costs 15 euros. No, it doesn't. It's 15 euros plus 30%
Right.
because I need to pay tax and I need to pay tip.
Right.
So it's like, okay, math, math, math. It's going to be like more like 20 euros. Great.
Yeah.
So you never, it's always, you just in your head, like always inflate what you're paying for like a little bit. Where
Yeah.
in Europe, or at least in my experience in Portugal, the VAT, the tax is just included. Like what you see on the menu is what you get. And
Mhm.
that includes everything. And there's no tip on top of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's also something that's hard for Americans to get used to, like
Yeah.
moving to a place where there isn't this tip culture.
Right.
Like, or I've had friends who come visit and they're like, don't we have to tip? We have to
Do I
tip.
have to tip?
And I'm
Do I
like,
tip?
you leave a little bit if you want, but it's not expected.
Yeah, so there's the same thing here in the Netherlands. Like if you thought the service was good, you could leave a couple of euros. Although I do have one Dutch friend who insists that you just tip just like you would in America, but she's the only one, and she's very
Hmm.
unusual. She doesn't ride her bicycle.
So she's different.
It's really different. So
She's Dutch.
she's
She's Dutch.
Dutch. Yeah, she's
Okay.
Dutch.
Oh,
But
interesting.
but she's like pretty much the only one I know that does that. I pretty much everybody else is just like if you think the service was good, you leave a couple of euros and then that's it. So, um, yeah.
You mentioned this Dutch friend, and it made me think of something because um like do you remember the first time that you went into like a local's like a Dutch person's home and what happened?
Oh yeah, I remember very distinctly because I actually made my very first Dutch friend on the very first day we arrived. And
Okay.
and I did that because how that happened is because we had a dog. So Murphy, our dog, I was taking him for walks in the local park. And this is very typical of dog owners. If people are dog owners, they know this. It's like basically you talk with other dog owners when you're out walking your dog and hanging out in the park in the mornings. And so I ran into this woman who was walking her little dog, and we started chatting. And her name was Silvana, which is Italian. And so immediately I thought, oh, she's an Italian. And my background is that I speak fluent Italian. I lived in Italy for 2.5 years when I was younger. Um, so I've actually been an expat before.
Oh yeah, you have. Well, first you had that abroad experience when you were younger in the
Exactly.
Netherlands, and then yeah, so you've
That
been an
pretty
expat
much,
multiple times.
yeah, that pretty much shaped my life, really. Going on being an exchange student really shaped my goals for the rest of my life, basically, where I was just basically angling to get myself to Europe because I loved it so much. So
Nice.
anyway, but back to my story. So Silvana, it turns out, is half Dutch, half Italian. And so we got started having coffees together so we could speak in Italian together. Because that was, yeah, she also was very interested in just chatting in Italian, and we talked about a lot of stuff. And she was my first friend. And it turns out that she actually ran a business out of her home making Dutch apple tarts and selling them to restaurants.
Oh my gosh, what a good friend to have.
I know, right? And she invited me over one afternoon to her house and let me have some of her Dutch apple tart, which was delicious and fantastic and totally makes sense that she sells it around the city. So, um, but that was my first experience going over to like into a Dutch person's home in Amsterdam. So
Mhm.
it was really quite a memorable occasion for also because of the food.
Yeah, that sounds
It's
amazing.
always served with whipped cream, which has the
Ooh,
first name in Dutch because the word and for whipped cream in Dutch is slagroom. I'm not even kidding.
I
That's
love
like
that.
it's
That
just
makes
like
me think of just like somebody just like throwing whipped cream on something like a schlockrumb.
schlagroom. Yeah, that's true. Kind of like schlagroom. It makes me think
Schlock.
of someone trying to spit up or something. I don't know. It's like the opposite of what I think of when I really, whipped cream. I love whipped cream. So, but anyway, so she served me apple tart with schlagroom.
That's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so that was a great experience.
Mhm. And what do you find is like very culturally different about Dutch people?
Well, that's an easy one, and I think a lot of people know already this about the Dutch. I think I don't know if Americans know this about the Dutch unless they know Dutch people or have met Dutch people, but basically they're very direct, almost to the point of rudeness, sometimes a little bit beyond. You really have to just kind of like I've actually met Dutch people who think that the Dutch are too rude, using it as this honesty as a form of of punishment or something like too overly they're using it as an excuse to be mean or something. So, but that was just a couple of Dutch people I've talked to have said that. But the truth is that they're super, super direct. That's part of the reason why they just don't get along with British people at all. I mean, they do, but they they just are not really seeing really eye to eye in a lot of ways because the British and in general are very uh, polite and don't tell you to your face what they're really thinking. Sometimes that's the stereotype, of course, but like it's very, very common. They don't really like to confront and and the Dutch are very, very upfront and open about it. Like they'll just tell you what's on their mind, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
They'll say crazy stuff like I don't know, I had a friend who said one time that they had a Dutch person over and said, "Oh, this meal was much better than your last meal." You're like, what is that? But stuff like that, where they're
Yeah,
just, and it's almost like, do they know how rude they're being? And the answer is they don't care.
yeah. Well, it
They
sounds
don't
like
care. They
yeah.
also like to put themselves like they have their nose in other people's business. That's really also
Mm,
very Dutch. Like
really?
they have an opinion about everything and they're gonna let you know it, and whether you like it or not. So
Okay.
it's those things where you just, at first, it's very disconcerting as a foreigner, as an American coming over, because we are not that direct, not like the Dutch are, and so it's kind of disconcerting at first, but it's also doesn't take long before it didn't take long for Dan and I to adjust because it also felt refreshing
Mm,
because there you know where you stand
hmm.
with people. They're just going to tell you what they're thinking or how they're feeling or whatever it is. And And then you don't have to worry thinking about like, I don't know exactly what he was talking. I don't know exactly what his intentions were or what he was thinking. You just know because they just tell you. So they
Yeah.
have no filter, kind of. But anyway, that's sort of one of the biggest overriding features of the Dutch culture that I've observed
Yeah.
since being here.
Has that influenced the like your directness, do you think? Like, are you more direct now after living in the Netherlands?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Because of course it's you get used to it, you're living in it, and I know that it makes an impact because I know that I now get looks sometimes when I'm talking to I have a lot of British friends that I do Zoom writers that I write with online. And I know that sometimes I say things that they're kind of, I can see they're kind of like, they kind of like, you know, their mouth goes into a straight line and they kind of look nervously to the left or the right because they can't believe I just said something. And I'm like, oh, I guess I was being a little Dutch there because it made them really uncomfortable. And I've been told by my friends in America the same thing, like, wow, that was really direct. And I'm like, oh, I guess I hadn't even really thought about it. I was just, you know, because you do get used to it. You get used to it because if they're going to do it, I'm going to do it for crying out loud.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like it doesn't,
exactly.
it's just like that. They appreciate you being blunt too.
Hmm.
Like that's the other thing is that the Dutch are not, they're not interested in someone pussyfooting around or, you know what I mean? Like tiptoeing
Yeah.
around things. They would rather talk about it. And they say things that you're just like, I can't believe they said that, you know, like I'm like when COVID happened and we were just I think it was just the beginning of COVID. So people were still out, things were still open, but it was pretty clear it was going to be shut down at some point. And I was with a Dutch friend, one of my Dutch girlfriends. And I was like, wow, can you believe what's going on with this crazy thing? And she just goes, just like this, she goes, well, you know, we are too many people on Earth. This is about time. And I was like, wow, okay, that was not what I was expecting. But at the same time, if you look at it, it was like a thought, a rational thought that, you
Sure.
know, the Black Plague wiped out two-thirds of the population. And then, you know, we have these things that happen that like keep our population under control, but we haven't in the
Yeah.
last, you know, so
Yeah.
maybe I'm still kind of crazy that
Yeah.
she's
It's like other people are thinking it and just
right.
not saying it. And
Exactly.
then this Dutch woman, she says it. She says
Yeah.
what everyone's thinking.
Yeah. That's kind of what I guess you could say that about a lot of Dutch people.
Yeah. Yeah.
They say what other people are thinking, they just say it out loud,
Yeah.
whether it's nice or not.
True.
So anyway,
On the topic of COVID,
hmm,
so you were in Amsterdam during COVID, yes?
yeah, yeah,
What was COVID like in Amsterdam? Because I know that, you know, different countries, even within the EU, you know, were handling things differently. I was during COVID looking over to the US and just sort of like comparing what was going on. You know, you're sort of looking around and comparing vaccination rates everywhere. And I think it was a really interesting study in like different cultures and how they handle this
yeah.
kind of crisis situation. So what was it like personally for you living through COVID in Amsterdam?
It was actually fascinating. We were Dan and I were both glad to be here, frankly. The Dutch actually were really like very in some ways they were very thoughtful and they didn't curtail people's freedom. So they did shut down the restaurants and but you could still order in, which is kind of like what? But they shut the restaurants down. They tried to keep people from meeting in groups. You had to walk 10, whatever it was, like 2 meters away from another person, but everybody was allowed out of their house. So basically the Vondel Park, which is the big park nearby, was just jammed with people doing like outdoor exercise classes,
Hmm.
like all day long. including myself and Dan, we went to them too. Like all of these gyms just like transported their things to to outdoor spaces so
Hmm.
that they could do like there was even like a gym there was a gym that we went to that actually had transported a whole bunch of like biking machines and their weights and everything to like a can like a covered like they set up a tent. That's what I'm trying to say. They set up a tent and I'm like, how is the tent any different from being inside? Because it still has like sides and stuff.
Yeah.
But so the Dutch were not really hardcore about it. And they did have a curfew at a certain point, which was super entertaining for us because we have a view of we live on the third floor on a canal
Hmm.
at a bridge that intersects with another canal. So it's a really big sort of pass-through point. And so we would just sit in our window and watch. And COVID was really weird because there was like everything was shut down and nobody was out. So it'd be the city was like empty, like as if it were a ghost town.
Wow.
And then at 5 minutes to 9 o'clock in the evening, before the curfew hit, because if you were caught outside after the curfew, they really got the Dutch where they really hurt, and you would get a big fine. So
Yeah.
that was motivating because the Dutch they are not happy to be paying a fine, especially a big one. And so basically at 5 to 9, we'd sit there and watch, and suddenly there would be all these frantic bikers going fast as they could, like in every direction. It was so crazy to watch because it was like suddenly from empty, it was like super crowded with people just frantically pedaling as fast as
Wow.
they could to get back to their house before 9 o'clock. So it was a really crazy, it was crazy to watch that. It was almost like a Keystone Cop kind of experience.
Like this comedic like moment.
Comedic, totally comedic. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
so but
cool.
they were much more open and less oppressive than a lot of European countries.
Hmm.
So and they went through phases, sometimes they would open up a little bit and then they would close down a little bit, but they never did what some of the other European countries did, which was like house arrest,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Like we didn't need papers to be out. We would just go out, you know.
Yeah. 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 I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was similar in Portugal. We never needed papers to go out. I know they did that in like Italy,
Italy
maybe
and Spain
France.
and France. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a friend in Marseille. She was allowed out of her apartment once a day for
Wow.
1 hour to go shopping, and she had to present her paper when she
Hmm.
was out, and then she would be, I mean, that was like basically that's like house arrest.
Yeah.
So bleh, that was
Completely.
horrible. And I think in Italy was also very strict and Spain as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, in Portugal, it was less strict and people could be out. I remember sort of as part of some of the waves, like later on in COVID, they were restricting like groups of people from gathering outside. It was like if you were in a group of more than 10 people or something, you would get fined. So they
mhm.
were trying because people couldn't gather inside, so they were gathering outside. And I think it was
Right.
mostly like young people a
Yeah.
lot, like college
Yeah.
age students and this kind of thing. And
Yeah.
still being outside in close proximity to people, you still have the ability to spread
Right.
COVID.
Right.
So they were trying to lock down on that a little bit. But I do think that like, I don't know, it's interesting because I know that there's a huge family culture here. Like that's one of the
Yeah.
main values that I perceive in Portugal is that people are very close to their families and they're also very social and so
Mhm.
they're gonna see their family, they're gonna see their friends. But I feel like other European countries like Spain is huge into like
Yeah.
gathering outside
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff. So maybe that's why they felt the need to sort of suppress it more because people want to do that. They have that tendency, and that's
Yeah.
actually was going to be something that was dangerous
Yeah.
during COVID, but it's hard when you have that culture and you're having to tell people like, oh yeah, don't leave the house. You can't. see people, you can't be outside with your friends.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, so here they didn't really do a whole lot of that, but they did also have the group, no more than whatever, 10 people, I think it was. And then otherwise you get a fine. And it was actually, this is hilarious. Okay, so I'm going to say something that's really not PC, but very Dutch. Okay, so you know the stereotype of the Scottish person is very cheap,
Okay.
right? Okay, so the Dutch are the Scots of the continent.
Oh, okay.
They are super cheap. They're always looking for a bargain. They're always looking for the special angle. They're always paying the lowest they possibly can for everything. That's part of their personality also, I think, is for a lot of Dutch. That's very typical, like kind of way of thinking.
Hmm.
And so what happened was when they first instituted the no gathering rule, they had like the fine was 100 euros if you would be fined 100 euros if you gathered. And I guess the Dutch were kind of like, well, that's no big deal. We don't really care about that. And so they were still gathering. And the government turned around and said, okay, fine, 800 euros.
Oh,
Over, man. There were no Dutch people gathering after. So it basically was like, oh wow, that's going to really hit my pocketbook. So
yeah.
forget it.
They knew how to make it hurt.
They knew how to really get the people to respond. So they
Yeah.
hit them in the wallet. It was really funny. I was like, okay, that's a really big fine for for gathering outside, but there you go. So
Effective.
very effective. And they knew because of course it's the Dutch are very, very interested in trade, money, enterprise, all of that kind of thing. And I mean, I personally have been the recipient of many a fine that I was like, I didn't know this was going to get a fine. I would just get an envelope in the mail saying, you did this wrong, you get a fine. So that's very
Yeah.
typical. So the Dutch know that they would follow through.
Hmm.
It wasn't like a fake, empty promise. It was like
Totally.
the government was like, this is our opportunity to make some money.
Yeah. Efficient.
Very efficient. So
Nice.
anyway, so that's part of the COVID experience here was that it was a little Dan and I actually traveled quite a bit during COVID, but we never left the country because we were concerned,
Mm.
and rightly so, that the borders, if we did leave, that we wouldn't be able to come back in. Because
Hmm.
even though we had a visa, a residence visa for working, there were countries out there that were not even letting their own citizens back.
Hmm.
Cue Australia.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking in my head, Australia. Yeah.
Zealand, Australia, I think it was.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it was New Zealand, but Australia for sure. But anyway, so we didn't. We traveled a lot in the Netherlands, so that was actually a great experience for us in terms of just getting to see more of the Netherlands that we probably would have never or would have taken us a long time to actually get around to visiting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now we're leaving, so it's good we got a chance to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You're leaving.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So you've already said that you started out as, living abroad when you were a teenager, essentially for the first time.
Yeah.
And then, you also lived in Italy, became fluent in Italian, then moved to Amsterdam. And now what's next?
What's next? Well, right now we're in flux, as it were. Dan and I know that we want to be living in Europe, but we've been in Amsterdam for 6 years, and the weather is horrendous. It is just so it's horrendous in a little subtle way where it's just always a little bit cold. It's raining an awful lot. I think it rains more than half the year, actually, statistically. I'd have to look it
Mhm.
up, but I'm pretty sure. And and it's just dark and gray and a lot of the time. We've had actually really nice spring this spring, but that's not typical at all.
It's just
So,
like, don't leave.
right.
Don't leave.
Dan was like, now Amsterdam's just jerking us around now.
Yeah. You sure you don't want to stay?
Exactly. It's so
Oh,
beautiful here when it's not raining and freezing. So
yeah.
But anyway, so we wanted to try and find a place that was sunnier. So we're in the middle of trying to make that happen. Um, my husband's looking for work, and so he's looking for work that will allow us to live in Spain or Portugal or the south of France, but we don't know exactly where we're going to end up yet.
Hmm.
Depends on what job he gets, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's really hard to plan for the future, but we do know we're going to be embarking on the expat adventure once again.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, that would
Yes.
be interesting.
Nice. Yeah. And
Southern Southern Europe.
yeah, you're seeking sun,
Think
seeking
fun.
sun.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and I know that this is it's a really challenging time to look for a job just for everyone.
Yeah.
I know that I talk to a lot of other um not expats, non-expats, people who want to work in a different country who are asking like, how do I get a job in another country? And how do I optimize my CV, my LinkedIn to get
Right.
recruiters to notice me? I've applied to 200 jobs and I've got 10 rejection letters. And what do I do? And
Right. Right.
it's tough. Things are taking longer now, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's just a matter of time. And I think that, well, when I moved to Portugal, I leveraged my network and I used LinkedIn and
Mhm.
basically just I think it's helps to if there's people you know and there's people that you can talk to who work in different countries, but it's also, yeah, it's looking for a job that's like remote. Everybody wants a remote job.
Yeah, and
Not a lot of companies
not a
want,
lot of companies want to do it anymore. They kind of got into it, I think, after COVID, but there's movement away from it, seems like. So, um,
yeah.
yeah. One thing that was interesting was that when Dan was looking for work in Amsterdam, and I don't know if I've got this story completely right, but I'll tell it to you anyway because it might be
Hmm.
interesting. But basically, he was looking on LinkedIn and other sites to try and find jobs in Europe, and he wasn't getting very much. He wasn't getting a lot of options of jobs that were being offered in these other countries, and so Amsterdam actually in the Netherlands. And so he was like, you know what? I'm going to go in. He went into his LinkedIn profile and he randomly picked an address in Amsterdam and he rebranded his LinkedIn as if he were already in the Netherlands.
Ah,
Suddenly he had a lot of hits. It was
mm,
kind of a trick because, of course, he wasn't really living there, but at the same
yeah,
time, because basically a lot of companies don't want to pay for someone to be to
yes,
coming over. They don't want to pay for transportation or whatever it's called when you
yeah,
once
relocation.
relocation. That was it. So they didn't pay any of our relocation, the company that hired Dan, but they did interview him, and then they said, "Yeah, we'll do a visa for you."
Hmm.
But I think that there's an awful lot of companies that don't bother looking at people that are coming from, applying from another country where they would be like, well, the company's not going to pay for the relocation
Yeah,
package or whatever.
yeah.
They would rather hire someone who's already on the ground.
I agree. That's a really good point
Yeah.
because, yeah, I think when I was applying to jobs in Lisbon, I was getting no response, like nothing.
You mean from
And
America or once you were here?
from
What,
the US,
from the
yeah, I
US?
was
Yeah.
applying from the US exactly.
Yeah.
And it was similar actually when I moved from Chicago to New York. I mean, it was also during the recession.
Right.
So it wasn't great, but kind of similar to now, we're not in a recession, but it's not a great job market. The sort of companies have
Right.
more power in this case. And I remember, I didn't put like a New York address on my resume and I just wasn't hearing back from people at all. And so I think even in the US, I think that happens as well,
Yeah.
just like within states and things. And I have talked to people who are, wanting to live in Europe and I've said maybe just try to live in the country for a couple of months, have that address there, be looking from there,
Yeah.
and maybe you'll have a better chance of finding something. But just rebranding your LinkedIn to
Same
say
can
you
work.
can change your location easily. Like I
Yeah.
don't think they check for that. So you could just say like I'm in
Um,
Amsterdam, and on your CV you can just say Amsterdam,
yeah, right.
or you
Exactly.
don't even have to say. And that's I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I shared it because you said that, I know you deal with a lot of people who are, you know, also job hunting and so on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I thought that was super clever, but
Yeah.
it's because my husband's super smart.
Well, thank Dan for that tip.
I will. I will.
But yeah, but you're in a unique position that I mean, you freelance and you kind of, you're an author and you've also worn many hats, as you said. You've had many different jobs throughout the years, and sort of what do you have any advice or tips for other people who are also in a creative industry who aren't necessarily in a position or looking for kind of like the corporate job?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Netherlands, there's something called the DAFT, and the DAFT is basically entrepreneur visa. So
Mm,
you have to be, I think you have to be in an incorporated business, which is actually not hard to do, to incorporate yourself or whatever. And I have at least two friends that do this. One is an architectural designer. She's an interior designer, and she did this. And so basically, there's some different rules. She doesn't get a 30%, ruling, as they call it. She doesn't get
hmm.
that tax break, but she can work here on her own business from her, um, as her own business, her freelancing. She can do it
Okay.
without a um, getting a visa from some company. And I think actually we looked into Spain. Spain has what's called a digital nomad visa.
Hmm.
So Spain has, it's a similar kind of thing. You have to show that you do some kind of work. I'm not exactly sure how that one works, but it seems to me that it could also be used as a, if you're a freelancer and you're doing creative work digitally, maybe you would be able to leverage that. But certainly in the Netherlands, they have an actual visa for creatives who they want to try and encourage the businesses to be, you know, choose the Netherlands kind of thing.
Nice. Okay, that's
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
I can't
don't
remember what it stands for, but it's DAFT, like,
daft.
which is a terrible name for a visa, but
Well, in English it is.
exactly in English.
But yeah, but
But
that's
anyway.
that's 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 nice that they're trying to encourage, yeah, freelancers, entrepreneurs, people running their own businesses.
Mhm.
Um, I can't remember if in Portugal there's like an entrepreneur visa. I think there is. I think there's an entrepreneur visa. There's also a digital nomad visa. I don't know if that's changing. So that's similar to Spain. But yeah, there's kind of different ways that you can
Right.
get a visa to come to a country and not necessarily be tied to the highly skilled work or the
Right.
corporate sort of
Right.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
And what's been your experience just like being a daft or well, I don't know
well,
if you're exactly a
I don't
daft
need to
because
be a dad
you're
because I'm the
on
wife
you're
of,
the wife, so you're not a daft. But
I'm the wife, so I'm
what's
not.
been your experience being just like a creative in working in Amsterdam?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's probably really good for someone who's actually doing something like I just am writing at home, so it's not like I have a lot of experience out doing. I'm doing a lot outside of my house. So, but I see a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands in general. I think they're very encouraging of that. So I think it's probably there's a lot of opportunities here too. Because like if I decided I wanted to focus on being like a fine artist, for example, um, under the visa I have with my husband, I can apply for scholarships from the government to
Mm,
for artist stipends and stuff like that. which is really great. So the Dutch have a lot of that kind of stuff, which is um, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my experience in Amsterdam is that it's very, very friendly to the creatives, to people who are trying to, sort of like make a place for themselves in this sort of hodgepodge new market that we live in, of like everybody cobbling together whatever it is that they do to make a living.
Yeah.
So, but personally, it doesn't really impact me every day because I'm not actually actively out doing, that's not
Mhm.
my kind of business. I'm just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
So,
But
yeah,
that's good. Yeah. It seems like they care about creatives. And yeah, Amsterdam sounds like a really nice place,
it is
or the
really nice.
Netherlands in general. Sounds like a nice place to live,
Yeah.
if it wasn't for the weather.
I know that if it wasn't for the weather, this would be, I mean, it's already a really crowded city as it is, but
Mm,
ridiculous. It's overcrowded at this point just because too many people are moving here, but
sure. Because it's so good.
because it's so good. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Do
But
you have any other questions for me?
yeah. What do you think if you could go back and give yourself some advice when you were first moving abroad? What kind of advice would you give yourself?
That's a tough one. So I'm trying to think what that would I think I would try to come up with something encouraging because, of course, there were definitely times when it was really difficult, where you're kind of like, I can't make any friends and I don't know anything and I can't figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. And I feel especially as the wife of someone who's got a job, it's even
Mm,
because you have no sort of like structure to which, to operate in.
yeah.
So I don't know. I would say. I guess one of the first things I would say is that if and we're Dan and I have actually actively talked about this in our next move is that we're going to be more proactive about getting together with people.
Hmm.
We're a little bit hobbled because we came to Amsterdam like 6 months before COVID,
Yeah.
but we didn't really make a big push at the beginning to try and meet people or join organizations or whatever it is that we brainstorm, whatever it is, sports or you know, clubs or whatever. And we didn't have a lot of success, even after COVID with that. And I think that I'm not sure why that was, but I think that we did think, okay, well, in our next place, we're going to make a rather than just wait for someone to that we meet randomly who were like, oh, we like this person, let's go out or whatever, but to actively even, like there's meetup and stuff.
Hmm.
We were even talking about we could like set up meetups ourselves
Oh, that'd be cool.
so that we would have like, I don't know, one of our goals is to have a sailboat. So Dan and I were discussing we could do meetups where we'd have, people interested in going sailing with us some afternoon, just come here and bring some food and I think meetups, I'm not sure if you pay or not. I can't remember, but like, just a little group that we're going to go sailing with that we have something in common and we can talk get to know each other while we're doing an activity.
Yeah,
Like I was going to do like sketch club or people who want to get together in the park and
that'd be
draw,
great.
so
I think that's a great idea.
something like that where it's more proactive.
Hmm.
Because it's really that's I think the hardest thing about being an expat is not feeling part of a community.
Hmm.
And if you can dive into the expat community, oh, that's the big tip. Okay, so when we first came here, we were like, okay, we're going to make friends with Dutch people because like we want to integrate into the culture. And so we're not really going to make an effort to meet expats because basically we thought, okay, well, we want to be we a lot of expats here in Amsterdam are executives at different companies that are here for 2 years and then they leave. There's
Mm,
a lot of transients. So we were like, we want to make friends with people who are sticking around. So we want to integrate. Well, the truth is that the Dutch are difficult to integrate with for a couple of reasons.
mm,
One is that they just have all their friends because they're here. They don't need more friends because they've got their group of friends or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but I think at the beginning, we both of us were a little bit poo-pooing the expat community. And I think we've realized that that is the community that we need to access
Yeah.
because the other people who are living abroad in a foreign country, that's what you have in common.
Hmm.
And that's enough for you to make friends because you're going to be sharing information, you're going to be helping people with their problems, they're going to be helping you. It becomes that's the community is the hope, you know. I mean, we have more of an expat community now than we did when we first started here in Amsterdam, but it's taken a lot of time and we've never really felt connected to it.
Mm.
So we're really hoping that if we start out strong in that arena, that we can build a, a sort of a base of friendship that will sustain us during the times that it's really difficult being an expat, because there's definitely times where it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great advice. I
Yeah.
also think that's my number one tip to people as well is like find your community. And it is like I had the same experience as you guys when I moved here with my ex-partner and we were like, we want to focus on Portuguese people. We want to be friends with Portuguese people. And then, we didn't really make a lot of good friendships because exactly like you said, a lot of Portuguese people, they've grown up here, they have their families, they have their friends here. They're nice. They'll help you if you need help. But they're not going to be, you're not going to get super close. Um, and what I have found my community in the expat community here in Lisbon. And there's nothing wrong with that because like you said, that you have something in common immediately and you can sort of share stories and you can support each other. Um, I also think it's wonderful because you get to people come from all over, right? So
Right,
it's like it's not just like you would be an American in Amsterdam only hanging out with Americans,
right.
although maybe some people do that. But for
It
me,
happens.
yeah, it happens. But for
Just
me,
be
I
a
love
lot of
having, yeah, they're everywhere.
us.
Um, for me, I love having friends who are from different countries and different cultures, and we all kind of share with each other and learn things from each other. And so you get to live in another country, but you also get to learn about other countries at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. So I feel really lucky that I can say that I have a couple of Dutch friends
Hmm.
that I consider friends, but most expats in Amsterdam don't. And when they hear that I have a Dutch friend or two Dutch friends or three or whatever it is that we have a few, they're shocked. And part
Hmm.
of it also is because we speak Dutch. So that's
Hmm.
another little tip.
100%.
If you want to feel a little more integrated in whatever country you're going to be going to learn the language is a big deal. And even if it seems like it's not a big deal, like in Amsterdam, everyone speaks English. Like the majority of expats here don't speak Dutch. I mean, they don't need to because the Dutch, it's like their second language is almost like their first because
Yeah.
they're so fluent in, especially in Amsterdam. You can find other places in the Netherlands where you're not going to get that, where they're only speaking Dutch, but it's not common in Amsterdam. And so a lot of expats don't bother because like why?
Yeah.
Dutch and the Dutch because they're Dutch, you say, I'm learning to speak Dutch, and then they look at you and they go, but why? It's such a stupid little language. I'm not even kidding. I've had that response so many times from Dutch, not even funny enough. But that is definitely, they're like, why would you learn our stupid little language? No one speaks our language.
I love that they see it that way.
I know. It's really,
That's amazing.
but at the same time, they appreciate it
Yeah,
that
of course.
we speak it, but they're puzzled
Yeah,
by
they're just like, why would you
why would you
go through
bother?
all this pain and suffering?
It's a
They'll
really
be
hard
like,
language, even for the Dutch. They'll be the first to admit it. They're like, our language is hard.
yeah. But it's
So,
like, but it's like, oh, you live there and you want to feel closer to the community and more integrated. And it's the same thing in Portugal, like everything you just said, except for saying it's a stupid language because Portuguese would never say it. But everything else is the same. Yeah. It's
yeah,
like the level of English is so good in Lisbon that you can really get by without it. If you go out into the rest of the country, you may find that it's harder. People are going to speak English less. Also, just like dealing with services, bureaucratic services, things like this. Sometimes they don't speak English to you. Even if they can, sometimes they just, they're government employees. They don't want to.
Right.
But otherwise, it's like you can get along very easily without it. And I find that if you are fluent, like I have friends who are fluent in Portuguese, but they're not native from Portugal. And they do seem to have more Portuguese friends and be a bit more like integrated into their communities. But
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I also have Portuguese friends. Most of the people that I'm closer to have also lived abroad. Like, so they have more of a world mindset. Like, I don't know how else to say that,
You?
like a global view or global awareness, or they
Yeah.
have that experience of knowing what it's like to live in another country. So again, like you have that in common as soon as you meet them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, community, whether it's locals or not, super important.
Yeah. I'd say that's probably number one, I'd say, in
Mm,
terms of just making a success of living abroad,
yeah.
is to find a community that feels comfortable to you, because otherwise you're just going to feel really out of place all the time.
Yeah.
And
Makes
that's
sense.
not nice. That's not a nice feeling.
No. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that tip. That's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap things up, um, is there anything that you have going on now that you want to share? Where can people find you? Anything else you want to share with the
Yeah.
listeners?
Yeah, sure. I've actually like right now I'm working on a middle grade novel. It's called The Temple Cat, and it's about a girl in ancient Egypt who can take on the powers of the gods' totem animals. So that's super cool. And it's almost ready to go out on submission. So I'm hoping that's gonna one day hit the shelves. So you can look for my name there. And you
Great.
can also find me on Instagram, Janet Leffley, at Janet Leffley, I guess they put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be starting a Substack soon called Sketch Time with Janet, because basically I love sketching, and I figured I would just, yeah, I could write about it. And I have a master's in fine arts, so I figure I've got some stuff to share with people
Yeah.
about art. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start this Substack, but I haven't done it yet. So
Okay.
just keep your ear peeled, your eyes peeled, whatever it is, your ear open for it.
Yeah,
And
but soon. Yeah,
yeah,
we can do once you guys land wherever else is next for you after Amsterdam, we can do an update podcast. We can do
update
a
podcast.
yeah, and then you can say, "Oh, the novel is out. Here's where you can find it. Here's
That's
sketch
right.
time with Janet. Here's the link." You'll have
Right.
you'll have more to share, but yeah, I mean, I know from you coming to visit Lisbon. You've been making beautiful sketches and watercolors, and I think yeah, I love seeing you share that on Instagram and showing people how to do it because I think that that's something that a lot of people would love to learn, myself included.
Well, I mean, it would be really fun if we was actually in Lisbon. Then we could just go out and sketch together. That would be fun.
Yeah, well, next time you're
Time.
here, we should definitely do that. We should do our
Absolutely.
we should do our art club outside
Yeah,
and
I
have
like
it'll
that.
be nicer weather
That's great.
and yeah.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. So, and maybe that's going to be, like I said, maybe one of the
Yeah.
meetups in my
Yeah.
in our next adventure, expat adventure. I'll do art club meetups. So
Amazing.
that could be fun.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, Shannon, for taking the time to have this conversation with me today.
Oh,
It
you're so
was,
welcome.
yeah, it was so nice to catch up. And yeah, best of luck with all of the preparations for your next adventure.
All right. Well, thanks very much. It was a pleasure to chat with you again and with you about all of this stuff because it's all interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of good to sort of think about it before you actually embark on it. So, like actively think about being an expat. What does that
Yeah.
mean? So,
Yeah. And what's important and
yeah, what to
what you've
focus
learned. Yeah.
on. So,
Cool.
yeah, so great. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to the How to Be an Expat podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Boyle. If you liked what you heard today, then please go ahead and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. And while you're there, if you could rate and review us, that would be really appreciated because it would help other people find the podcast also. If you're curious what it's like to coach with me, I'm offering a special free hour-long session for listeners of the podcast. During that coaching session, we'll go through your goals, your values, and you'll walk away with some actionable next steps to get you on the way to achieving what you want. So if you're interested in that, just head down to the show notes and I'll be leaving a link where you can see my calendar and schedule an hour with me. I'm looking forward to coaching with you. Thanks.